Great.
I hope your 2021 is off to a good start despite all the craziness in our nation.
Well, I'm claiming a wonderful year.
All right, I'm with you on that. Looks like we've got a nice bunch of folks tuning in today. I think at last count, we were over 40 people.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, it's a very eclectic group. I was sorry to hear about Miko.
Oh, yeah. It just shook me.
Yeah.
It just shook me. So, yeah. We all were.
Hello, Ardith. Good to see you. Second time today.
Second time today. Still good. It's still good to see you, David.
Hello, Ruth Ann. I see you there in the edge. There you are.
Yep, I'll be there. You'll see me twice today too, David.
That's true. Hello, Carol.
Hi, Carol.
Hello, long time no see.
Right.
Hi there.
So Phyllis, we're joking around because some of us had a worship committee meeting just a couple hours ago.
Oh, I know you keep seeing the same people every time you have a meeting.
Well, I'm glad to see you, Phyllis.
It's good to see you too. Well, you're seeing my picture and that's way better than how I look now.
Yeah, I should put up a picture too.
But I'm glad to be here.
Thank you.
Hello, Ann.
Hello.
Hi, Ann.
Hello there.
Thing today too.
Hello. Ruth Ann and Ardith. Hello.
Nice to see
The
you.
sun came out. Did you notice?
Yes.
Yeah, it's pretty out there. It was. Yeah, it's nice to see you, Ann, and not see your name on the chat line at church on Sunday.
I'm here.
Yeah.
Although there you are. As my father would say, I'm able to sit up and take nourishment.
That's a good thing.
Counts.
That counts, you bet.
Uh-oh.
There's some powerful reading material we've been sent.
Right. If you either looked at the transcript or you listened to the recording. Quite the message.
It is.
Yep.
Quite the message. I was telling Phyllis, I think at the moment we have over 40 people signed up to tune in today. So
Wonderful.
should be a nice bunch.
So we know who the punctual people are, don't we?
Right.
Sometimes.
Or those with nothing else to do. I don't know.
Well, Phyllis, what are you doing these days?
Not much. I stay in this house, hiding from COVID.
Yeah, well, that takes some doing sometimes.
Oh yeah, it's very difficult. So.
Hello, Jen and John or Ann.
Hello, hello.
Used to seeing people with bookcases and other things like that behind them, but
Yeah.
not typical that we get to see a real window behind somebody like Jen has right now.
Hello.
Hey, Steve Hammond.
Oh, let me get the video going here.
Ruth Ann, I could open.
There they are. Hello,
Yep.
Steve and Mary.
Hello, hello. Long time no see.
Yeah.
Hey.
We got Roland and Marcy. Oh, there's Erica.
Prue.
Prue. Hello,
Prue.
Erica. Hello, Prue.
Pete's coming.
Okay. Oh, there's AG and Brenda.
There we go. Now we can start.
Well, we've got a few more folks to tune in. I took a look at the folks registered and it was over 40 people. So we'll see how that goes.
You have a few more people to come
Wow,
on.
wow,
Yeah,
wow.
wow.
They won't all fit on the screen.
Well,
Hey,
you
Steve.
have to paste through various screens, but really the folks you need to most see are Brenda and AG.
Right.
Yeah. And that's why you're a podcaster.
Well, just think of all the calories you're saving. If we were meeting in person, we'd all be bringing brownies.
That's true.
I haven't had a brownie for so long.
Oh, dear. Hi, Judy. And Reese is in Hawaii.
Laurel, you must be missing Reese dearly since he's clearly in some tropical zone far away.
Yeah,
Here,
yeah, we try to keep the beach downstairs. We open the door so the breezes can come through, but oh, now he's on the moon. Well,
Hi, Miss Phyllis.
That's more appropriate.
Hello, how are you?
Good, baby,
Hey.
good. Good to
Good.
see you.
Hey, Sada, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
nice to see you all.
Hello.
Hi, Carol.
Where's the Steve's shirt? Don't know. Oh, yes, maybe she probably is the gal that read yesterday.
oh, there's Carl. Hi, Carl.
Hi. A lot different
Hi,
area.
Carol.
Well, yeah.
Oh, hey. Good to see you, Carl.
Good to see you guys too.
We've got a number of folks signed up. I'm going to give us a few minutes past. Actually, it's just now 4. My 1 clock is clearly off. So I'll give folks a couple minutes past 4 to connect with us today.
Hey, Mary and Steve, how y'all doing?
All right, how
We're
are you doing? How are
we're
you
doing
guys?
all right.
Good.
We're just so sorry to hear about Miko.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah,
What a time he had.
yeah.
I'm wondering if Judy Appleton wants to tell us about a special program she heard about on PBS in February. No?
Looks like a no.
No, I don't have the information in front of me. It has to do with the Black church but I don't, it's going to be a program on PBS, but there's something you can sign up for 15-minute increments, I guess, before the actual TV program, but that's too vague. I'd rather send you the information because I haven't studied it, looked at it that closely. I'm sorry.
David, I can send you information on it. Tim Russell, who grew up here in Oberlin, sent it to me. He is connected to that particular PBS station in Chicago, and he sent me an announcement about it, so I can forward it to you, and you can.
That would be great. Thank
Yeah.
you, AG. Yeah, just email it to me or whatever. We'll post
Yeah.
it. Thank you. Wonderful.
Tim Russell is Kurt Russell's elder brother, the high school teacher.
Yeah.
And Kurt Russell's son.
They were both my students.
Oh, who said that?
Prue Richards.
Oh, that's right, Carol.
Prue. No, it's
Oh,
Prue.
Prue. Oh, yeah, that's right. They were,
They
exactly.
were a lot of good people.
Everybody was your student crew.
Exactly.
I love it, including our kids, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, about two of them, the older two.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's Ken Cheek and Jane.
Yeah. Where's Bob?
And Mary.
Hi, Carol.
Hello.
Linda and John are going incognito.
And David.
I suppose it's time to mute ourselves. Everybody's muted but me.
Right. So
I'm not muted.
yeah. So if we'll get to that in a minute. Jen Bertoni is co-hosting, so you can relax. We haven't officially started quite yet, but we will
Really?
mute folks at some point. Just give it about 2 more minutes and then we'll get started.
Look at windows here. Look at the windows.
And Jen, for those of you that can see the chat on Zoom, Jen Bertoni has put a link in the chat, but we'll also get some information from AG and we'll post that too, but there is information in the chat.
All right.
I've done this before.
I just want to say that after I listened to Tom Skinner, I realized that was the same place that Francesca and her then business partner, Alicia Richardson, spoke in 2003. They went to Urbana, and I've never forgotten it because I had a message from her saying, "Mom, we're all ready, but we didn't know we were going to talk to 20,000 people."
One more minute, then I'll get us started. I'm delighted at all the folks that are tuning in this afternoon.
Hi, Carl.
All right, why don't we get started? First of all, welcome to everyone. And as other people join in, we will see that we get them situated. So why don't we begin just with a moment of prayer to center ourselves. Let us come before God in prayer. Holy One, we give you thanks for the gift of this day and this opportunity to be together. Even though this pandemic has forced us apart, we know that we are one with you. So be with us in this time of listening and sharing, of being attentive to each other's stories. Be with us as we are drawn together as sisters and brothers, your children. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. So that this afternoon, it is just a great delight to have AG Miller and Brenda Grier Miller with us. Where this came from is some folks in First Church, there were 2 groups, recently read this book, How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. AG and I have been rather regularly over the last, 17 plus years getting together. That's just, wow. Wow. And we have these conversations that don't have any agenda. We just get together for the sake of getting together. And I was sharing with this book with AG, and he took a look at it. And as he and Brenda were looking at it, in the first chapter, Ibram Kendi mentions this significant event in the lives of his parents. And AG and Brenda said, wait a second, we know what that event was all about. And wait a second, we know this guy's parents. So, and then AG and I had a subsequent conversation where he shared with me the impact of Tom Skinner's address, which was what's focused on in that chapter. This address that took place in 1970 in Urbana, Illinois, at an intervarsity event. And Brenda also has a very direct connection to this. So we thought this would be a wonderful opportunity for them to share their story of how this event had a significant impact on their lives. I would just, express my gratitude and thanks, Brenda and AG, for the many ways you welcomed me into this community all those years ago. I think in particular of the time that you pushed me to be a part of the MLK service and to give the keynote. And I remember when you first asked me, I said no, because I was completely intimidated by that, but you were persistent. And I am thankful that happened, but it would not have happened without your gracious invitation and your amazing support, which has continued. So thank you so much for being here today. The idea is we're going to just allow Brenda and AG to share their stories for approximately half or so of our time, and then we'll have some questions and answers. It might be helpful, given the size of our group, that as they're speaking, if there's something that comes up that you would like us to talk about later, you could just put it in the chat, and Jen and I will watch the chat, because it's a little hard to monitor multiple pages of people to see if you want to put a hand up. So that might be the easiest way to do it. But at this point, I'm just going to turn it over to AG and Brenda. Thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you, David. Thank you for the invitation. Thank everyone who's been a part of reading this book and dialoguing around it. Thank you for inviting us in. We chose that I would go first only because I was an eyewitness to the event. I was physically there amongst 20,000 people from around the country and the world at this large, very large Urbana in the middle of the coal in Urbana, Illinois, and which Tom Skinner spoke at. And you've heard the address. And if you haven't read it, I heard it, please, I'd encourage you to listen to it and realize that was spoken 50 years ago. And then wind the clock up to where we are today and try to ask yourself, how much has really changed? Where are we really? As we listened to it, I kind of went, wow. I was there 50 years ago. I was 19 years old. And it was a very tumultuous time for me as an African-American young woman in the middle of Brooklyn, Christian woman, let's be very specific, in the middle of Brooklyn, in the middle of the country and the world, where new terminologies of Black power and the so forth were raging up and down the country. And I didn't quite know where I fit in that, because after all, I was a Christian and Jesus taught me to love everybody. And I didn't understand exactly where that placed me exactly. I want to back ourselves up a little bit and to about, let's see, that was 1970. So about 5 years prior to that, still, once again, born and raised in Brooklyn, little Black girl in Brooklyn. And it was then that I interfaced for the first time with Tom Skinner. So I was a young girl whose mother sent her to church because that was the thing to do. And I did all that stuff and joined the church and got baptized and all that stuff to a good Baptist church. And was invited to hear this man, this evangelist, Tom Skinner, speak. And it was at that point that I had, for the very first time, and he was the famous person at that point, or notable person in New York, to be a gang leader out of Harlem, let me rephrase it, a PK gang leader. PK meaning pastor's kid out of Harlem, who had converted. And he gave the message that the night that I was taken to see him. And he kind of gave a message that I hadn't quite really heard. And that was about, you heard it in the talk, but it was about the fact of having an individual soul search involvement and injection, have God injected in my life. And so for some words, evangelical words, it was accepting Christ into my life as my own personal savior. And I heard his talk that particular night when 5 years prior to this Tom Skinner piece at Urbana. And I realized that I had not yet done that. I was a good kid. I went to church. I didn't kill anybody, steal anything, any of those things, none of the things that Tom had already done. And but I was interfaced with the question, have I given my life over to God and given it up? And it was that point that I did what we call accept Christ as my savior. I went up and accepted the Lord as my savior and started a journey, a real Christian journey at that point in terms of how giving God the lordship of my life and what that might mean and what that might look like and further itself. And so that started my involvement with Tom Skinner. And we'll fast forward to 5 years later, since about at 70. And so this man who had given me this new revelation about lordship of Jesus in my life, and here I was sitting in the midst of confusion and all kinds of things with, maybe there were 300 African or Black people, young people who were at this conference, and amongst, once again, 20,000. And Tom gives this message about the liberator has come. And all the words that you heard in that text of his speech, it was like, of that preaching moment, it was like, oh my goodness, he has made the connection that I didn't understand what to do and still was having trouble understanding what to do with, how I could still be a Christian and still understand the fact that Jesus loved me, Jesus loved you, but something that's going on in the world that we live in is not of God. And that was huge. That began a huge, not only for myself, but for many of us who were there. And Tom became kind of like our crusader to be able to help us work through and walk through and understanding and combining the understanding of our lived experience with our giving our lives over to Lordship of Jesus. And so that's my kind of experience. Some of it, that's what I'm going to bring. But I want to let AG talk because his is a little different. It came from a different place. And hence came the title of this time together, The Lord Works in Mysterious Ways. And I'll finish it by saying his wonders to perform.
Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you, David.
Yeah. I want to give you a little bit of in order to understand this impact, I think you need to have a little sense of who I am and where I've come from, because I think the context is important. I was born and raised primarily in Columbia, Missouri, in the Midwest, in a small Pentecostal church, which kind of focused on an insular, conservative, holiness, Pentecostal spirituality. What some might call a kind of pie in the sky gospel and a pie in the sky Christianity. It was a small congregation, maybe 7, 8, 9 families, essentially. But we worshiped, all day Sunday morning, Sunday school, church, regular church after that. We go home, eat dinner, come back for the youth program, YPWW, and then we'd have a night service on Sunday night. And then there were Wednesday night prayer meetings, and then there were Friday night services, and all our whole life was just focused and wrapped in this small bubble. I come from a family, though, that my family, both my maternal and paternal family, come from generations of the Methodist Church. And mostly what we now call the United Methodist Church, but they were, then it was called the ME Church, Methodist Episcopal Church. And then my father eventually left the ME Church as a minister and was drawn into the African Methodist Episcopal Church. My maternal grandfather, George, he was a Methodist minister all of his life. And so, I come from out of this great line of Methodism. And as that happened, when my father died, when I was 6 months old, shortly thereafter, my mother, who was a dyed-in-the-wool Methodist all of her life, was led into this Pentecostal body when I was about 2.5 years old. And so for the most of my life until I was a teenager, I was a part of this deeply conservative Pentecostal tradition. And we probably, by our standards, we were certainly asocial and apolitical. We, in fact, were told very clearly not to get involved with Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement because by their yardstick and standard, King did not make it in as a Christian because of our little narrow framework. He smoked and he did this and he did that, and he certainly was not a Christian, as were almost anybody else who didn't fit our little narrow framework. We ended up I stayed in the church, so I was maybe 13 or 14, maybe 14 or 15. And in the fall of 1966, my raging youthful hormones were bubbling. And before that, I had made a commitment to Christ, and I was, carried my Bible everywhere. And so I had this kind of radical transformation when I was going into high school. And part of it had to do with kind of issues of youth and, trying to navigate that. But the other part was as I began to put my eyes toward what I saw as the civil rights movement. With the rise of the Black Power movement, the Nation of Islam, the death of Malcolm X, the rise of the Black Panther Party, the rise of the Black Liberation Army for, I see Sister Asada is here in the crowd. She is named after one of the Black Liberation Army members, Asada Shakur. And all of the history, the development of the Black Pride movement. And it became very clear to me that there was something wrong with this kind of apolitical Christianity that I had grown up with. And I didn't understand it. I couldn't put my fingers on it. But I was later able to read James Baldwin in his book, The Fire Next Time. It's a fascinating read. And he talks about his own earlier life as a young, youthful minister in his Harlem church, his Harlem storefront congregation. And he came to a point where he felt like he was committing a crime by going and telling people to believe in this, as Tom Skinner called him, this gentle Jesus. Read this white Jesus. And he wanted to shout out, and this is what James Baldwin said, to throw away their Bibles, to get off of their knees and go and organize a rent strike. And when I read that in some ways kind of really summed up for me my entire frustration and the time frame of looking at the death of Malcolm, and later by 68, the death of King, the rise of the Panther Party, to deal with the death of Fred Hampton, in which Tom gives a faint reference to in terms of police brutality and what they might do, break into your apartment and kill you. That was a reference to Fred Hampton, the Black Panther Party leader in Chicago. As I kind of grappled with all of that, I began to really see what I saw as my major conflict with the Christian faith and with the church. So as I got out of high school, barely. It took me 4 years to get out of a 3-year high school. I literally graduated at the bottom of my class, in the bottom 5% of my class. But by the grace of God, friends helped me to apply and enroll to the University of Missouri. And this would have been in the fall of 1970. And so trying to figure out as a first year in a university environment with 26,000 students and almost predominantly white institution in the town that I grew up in. So I really felt alienated from this whole experience, and that sent me on this kind of this spiritual pilgrimage that led me to both reclaiming my Christian faith and finding it in a group called InterVarsity, which I'd never heard of before. And there were a small group of folk that I ended up meeting and went to the chapel. We prayed together and got to know each other in the fall of that year. And then somewhere in around January, December, I began to hear about this notion of Urbana. And they told me how much it cost and how long it would be gone. I was dirt poor, had no money to go to Urbana to go to something I knew nothing about. Yeah, so and to be out there in the middle of the winter. So I said, you all have fun. They went, and when they came back in January, there was one of the students, his name was Bob Lofting, came up to me sometime in January and said, "Hey, man," I said, "So how was that program y'all went to?" And he said it was great. He says, "In fact, there was a guy that spoke there that I think you might want to hear," and he handed me a cassette of Tom Skinner talking about racism and world evangelism. And it was, when I listened to that tape, it was shocking. It was revolutionary. It articulated all of what I was feeling and gave me a kind of historical backdrop. I'd never heard of the depths of the issues of slavery in high school, like I had heard from him, to begin to lay out the history of America in a way that really began to put it all together, and to say that this Jesus, this Christianity, that the liberator had come, it literally transformed my life. If I listened to that tape once, I listened to it 100 times. I shared it with some of the members of my little conservative church. Anybody and everybody, I could get to have them sit down with me for an hour and hear that tape. They heard it. And it was that kind of power that it gave me this kind of new insight. So remember now, this is also the beginning of the Black theology movement. And so in February of '71, that winter, I had a chance to hear James Cone speak at the University of Missouri for the very first time, the founder of the modern Black theology movement. And by the spring, it just so happened that a friend of mine who I grew up with, who had been involved with the Young Life organization, had come back into town, and we met at the University of Missouri just by chance. And he was in the student union having food. I walked in, we saw each other, and we started reacquainting ourselves. And it turns out that he had been to Urbana 70. And then we started talking about this tape by Tom Skinner. And then he said to me, "I've met Tom Skinner." And I said, "Are you kidding me?" And then right then and there, we literally hatched a scheme to get me to move from Columbia, Missouri to Stamford, Connecticut, in order to do work with young people in ministry in that region with Young Life, Black kids in that city. But my ultimate goal was that I could come and meet Tom Skinner. And we did it. And within that year, I had met Tom Skinner, became friends with him. He became a mentor to me. As it turns out, Brenda and I eventually met because we were hanging in similar circles with all those 300 folk, many of them from New York and other places. We all came back. We all ended up in New York City, and the crowd of young folk that we ended up hanging with were all of those folk who had come from wherever they came from, Chicago and from New York, and etc. And they were all had been radicalized by this speech and by Tom Skinner.
They had created themselves a survival pod to be able to survive the world with their Christian living and what was going on in the world around them.
Yeah. So in 1975, Brenda and I were a part of a group called the Radical Black Christian Forum. And this was a group of, all of them had gone to Urbana, except me. And there were maybe about 10 of us.
Mm-hmm.
And we started off on a journey, beginning to read Black theology, Latin American liberation theology, other traditions, trying to figure out as young Black folk how we could be Christian and be involved in what we hope was the revolution. And it's very interesting because some of my friends ended up becoming communists, and they left and joined the Black wings of Harlem branches of the Communist Party. Others went in other directions, and we all went in our own different directions with that. But it was clear that the crowd that we hung in with, we were all influenced by Tom Skinner and Larry and Carol Rogers.
Yeah.
Were the folk that he mentioned, his Kenday's parents. And when I read that chapter, and I said, wait a minute, my mom Carol went to Nyack College. I said, wait a minute. My father Larry went to Baruch College. He was a businessman. I said, oh, Brenda, that's Larry and Carol Rogers' son. I can't believe that this is their son. About a month and a half ago, we called Larry and Carol. We had a number for them, and we had not talked in maybe 8-10 years. And we called to just to check in with them and to say, hey, we heard about your son. This is what happened, and so it rekindled our friendship and relationship now. And again, I cannot believe, as we were listening again to it today, that his speech was 50 years ago. And look where we are in America today. And that speech is as vibrant and as relevant now as it was in 1970, in the midst of the rise of not only the Panther Party, but the Black Liberation Army and the Symbionese Liberation Army and all of the kind of radical movements that were happening in 1970. Look where we are today. So I'll stop there and love to entertain a conversation or questions or yeah, David.
Thanks, AG and Brenda. So what I'd like to suggest, since we've got like 33 people on this call, is there's a couple of ways that we can go about this. If you are comfortable entering questions or things that you'd like to engage Brenda and AG on by using the chat feature in Zoom, I can see that and I'll share your comments. I can scan around and I can look for hands up, or if you're really clever, you can use the reaction feature on Zoom to put your hand up. But I'll just open the floor for folks who might have follow-up questions or things that you'd like to discuss with Brenda and AG. There was not a set agenda. This is sort of like when AG and I sit down to talk. We just let the conversation go where it's going to go, and you never know where it's going to end up, but it's always someplace wonderful. So I'm just going to scan around and see if there's any hands of folks real quickly here. Don't be shy.
Steve.
And then I'll call on you. Okay, so I see Mary McDaniel. So Mary, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, when you went to Connecticut, were there any other groups that you were able to work with to influence their thinking as well as your own?
Wow, that's a good question, because the organization I ended up being affiliated with, and I don't know how many people know of the Young Life organization, but it's a Christian youth outreach organization, nationally, internationally known. They had a student-led group in Columbia that was ran out of the University of Missouri that worked with high school students. My friend, then Fred Lewis, now he's changed his name to an African name, Jabari Simama, was most actively involved with that group. And so when we moved to Connecticut, our plan was to kind of take the vision of Tom's speech and to go into the inner cities of Stamford, Connecticut, and to begin to evangelize in the youthful Black community of that community. And several of Fairfield County was the richest county in the country at that point, but it had these pockets of poverty in Stamford, in Norwalk, in Bridgeport, and et cetera. And so we began to build ministry with young people in the streets of Stamford and Norwalk, the projects of Norwalk, and even in the rich New Canaan town. There were pockets of black folk who grew up there, whose parents were the servants for all of the wealthy New Canaanites. And we began to work with them as young people, trying to preach a gospel that we understood as radical and revolutionary. I ended up being a student at the University of Bridgeport. And for those who do not know, at that time, Bridgeport was a haven for the Communist Party. And so we ended up, we couldn't find many Christians to talk to, so we ended up having conversations with some of the Black Marxists, and the Black communist folk were there, and became dear friends with them, and began to argue and debate and get involved with them, and met some of the national leaders, Jarvis Tyner and Gus Hall, who ran for president of the Communist Party. But we saw ourselves as fifth columnists that Tom was talking about, that we were going to bring an argument for the faith into their radical agenda. So that we were just crazy enough and young enough to think that we could actually do it and pull it off. But yeah, that gives you some sense of my time in Connecticut. And then eventually I moved to New York, and yeah.
Thanks, AG. We had a question from Jean McKibben in the chat. So Jean, I see your hand up, but I see your question. Do you have a different question, Jean?
Oh, no, that's the question.
Well, go ahead and ask it.
Okay. I think this is fabulous. I enjoyed listening to Tom Skinner very much, but where is the movement today and who is leading it?
Yeah. Here's the killer. Tom literally had a cadre, an army of young folk. Somewhere in the midst of it, he went through a divorce with his wife. And that created a whole different kind of problem. And he lost a lot of his steam, again, because, I mean, as radical as he was talking, he was still very committed to what he saw, the kind of conservative Christian lifestyle values. And when his family broke apart, that put a major breach. But I will tell you this, any folk of my age and generation who is in any of the major evangelical Christian organizations, you can bet your bottom dollar they have been influenced by Tom Skinner, mentored by him, sent to organizations to work in those, to infiltrate those organizations and to work. How well they've done, who knows? But his, I am still, I'm working on this whole notion of understanding and researching Black evangelicalism and Black fundamentalism. And Tom is intricately, his legacy is intricately woven into that fabric, for good or for bad, but it's definitely there. So he lost a lot of steam with that. And the movement kind of broke up. He ended up moving from New York to Washington, D.C. He ended up becoming the chaplain for the Washington Redskins. And then he married, what was Barbara's maiden name? Barbara Williams, who was the head of the Black Congressional Caucus. She was executive director of the Black Congressional Caucus, and the two of them began to build a whole new ministry in Washington with Black congressional members to try to move them toward public policies that were for change, et cetera. And Barbara, now Skinner, is still on the circuit, and she's still around and still is a great woman. And as Tom died in the 1990.
1994.
Exactly.
Thank you.
My last conversation with Tom was at a Christian college where I was giving my first paper on Black conservative evangelicalism at Geneva College in Western Pennsylvania. And it was a group of Black and white scholars that came in to give these papers. And I gave my paper and talking about the origin of this movement. And that night, they called in Tom Skinner to do the banquet, talk. And he essentially came in unannounced, unaware, and regave my whole lecture on the beginnings of Black evangelicalism, which was an amazing feat. We went out to dinner together across the street and had pizza together. And that was in the summer or fall, I can't remember, of that year. The year later, he died. And it was a crushing blow to me and to everyone else that because we loved him so much. He was such an important influence in our lives.
Yeah.
So,
AJ, I want to add something to that, because I don't as much see what Tom said and this whole piece. I don't necessarily see it as a movement. I see it as being able to read biblical history in a very different light than which has been preached to us for so long, and understanding and placing Jesus standing on the side of the disenfranchised and the power of the press. Anybody who was quote by the society considered less than, and that is something that we as Christians need to be able to adjust our thinking or pivot our thinking to understand that and understand what our responsibility is as Christians to that part of our world. And so I don't see it as much as a movement as a lifestyle that I consider. I've said I'm a social worker by training, and I've said oftentimes, many times, I'm a social worker because I'm a Christian, because I believe in the type of work and the integrity and the valuing of human beings that the social work principle puts forth. And I believe that comes right alongside of my understanding of biblical responsibility. So the concept of movement is like, no, lifestyle. So.
Thank you. We've got a question I think sort of follows up on some of that from Erica Saunders, and she writes, Reverend Skinner says in his speech, the thing you must recognize is that Jesus Christ is no more a capitalist than he is a socialist or a communist. He is no more a Democrat than he is a Republican. He is no more the president of the New York Stock Exchange than he is the head of the Socialist Party. He is neither of that. He is the Lord of heaven and earth. And if you're going to respond to Jesus Christ, you must respond to him as Lord. And then Erica asks, how does one emphasize the revolutionary nature of the gospel when it seems partisan?
Yeah.
That's an
Big question.
Yeah, it's a
Love
great
it. I
question.
love it.
No, it is a great question because it does seem partisan. At least in terms of how we think about partisanship today. But I can only say that let me go about this at a different level. My friend Alan Busak, who was one of the leaders of the United Democratic Front in South Africa. Some of you may have heard him speak when he came to campus several years ago. And in it, he was doing a reflection on what happened to the movement that they were fighting for a democratic society in South Africa. And then with the Mandela administration that came in, followed by the Mbeki administration, and then went to the Zuma administration, which brought a whole different wave of corruption and other issues, and people were fearful that their democracy was going to be sideswiped. And he indicated that many of the prophets, and they were all prophets of the Christian church, who were the ones that brought the apartheid regime down. And that once they had done that, they went off and went back to the church and bidded their peace. And now he was rethinking that he was going to no longer be a prophet inside of the king's court, but he was going to have to now rethink and become a prophet outside, even to the very institution for which he was committed, the African National Congress. And I think that is the that you have to be clear that you're going to stand for righteousness and for justice. And it doesn't matter whether it's Republican or Democrat, that you have to be able to stand for what you understand is correct and what the gospel of Jesus Christ is requiring of you, to preach the good news to the poor, to set at liberty those who are abused, to give sight to the blind, release to the captives, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord. In some cases, that may feel very socialistic, of giving back land and freeing prisoners and giving and doing the things that God is calling us to. That to me is the gospel. That is not Republican, it is not Democratic, it's not socialist, it's the gospel. And I think it's justice, and we have to stand for that. And I wouldn't label it any garb. I love Barack Obama, but I think Barack Obama had some foibles. I think he threw Barack Obama threw his pastor Jeremiah right under the bus. I think Barack Obama was so attempting to be the president of everyone that he did not really raise the critical issues of what has been impacting the Black community. Was the president successful? Yes, but not without criticism. And I think that we have to be able to be bold enough that if I could criticize this
Outgoing.
let me try to be Christian here. If I can be critical of 45, then I also have to bring the same kind of and I have to be willing. I am a supporter of Biden and Harris, but I am more a supporter of justice. And we have to be willing to raise the issues as we see them, to push them, because they get caught up in the quagmire of politics. And they're going to have to hear the voice of the people, the Christian voice, the the prophetic voice to help them to do the right thing and to be able to be critical of them if they don't. I mean, there are a lot of folk who were very upset with Cornel West for the way in which he criticized Barack Obama. But I think in some ways, Cornel was correct and Obama needed to be criticized. So I hope you see how I'm trying to skin this cat, right? So you all may have cat lovers here, so I'm so sorry. Wrong word. But trying to thread this needle. How about that? Because I think that it's a great question, and I think that we have to be very, very careful, but we also have to be seeking for justice at every point.
Thank you. I'm seeing a few other hands, so I'm just recognizing that I've seen Steve Hammond and Marcy Peterson, but I'm going to go over to Asata Cheers if you'd like to unmute yourself and raise your question.
Thank you, Mrs. and Mr. Miller. You guys are amazing. I loved hearing your stories. You said revolution a few times, and I just wanted to know, like, what exactly would a revolution look like for you today?
You can answer that.
So I'm going to repeat the question because your voice is a bit soft. It was, what would a revolution look like? Was that your question?
Yeah.
Right, sorry, my microphone.
Yeah, no, see, I should have expected that coming from her. Given her namesake, right? I want to say revolution is about changing making radical change that moves us to change structures and systems that will bring balance and bring wholeness to all of humanity. For as what John 3:16 says, for God so loved the world, the cosmos, and that includes the people, the environment, the air, the animals, the water. It includes all of that, all of creation. And in some ways, it's the revolution is a pipe dream, but it's one that I believe that we have to continue to fight to move toward it.
Thank you. Steve Hammond, you had a hand up. Unmute yourself and hop in.
Okay. Yeah, this is for Brenda. At the beginning of his sermon, Tom Skinner talks about, he makes a reference to the previous speaker in a way that he doesn't want to sort of, it sounds like I don't want to get us into this kind of conflict. So I wonder what was the atmosphere like at the gathering? Was there tension going on? How was it? Obviously there, like you say, I mean, you could know what a talk like that would mean in some places right now. So I just wonder, what was the atmosphere like there during the gathering?
Well, Steve, as I remembered, I don't remember who it was who particularly spoke before him, to be honest. This was several days that we were together, all 20,000 of us from around the world. And what I can say is that it was an intervarsity event that brought together everything that Tom didn't talk about. And what Tom talked about was, and the tension, yes, it was tense afterwards. It was tense all over the place because he didn't give it a pie in the sky, mom and apple pie speech or conclusion or challenge. It was hugely challenging. It was challenging for Black folks that were there. It was challenging for me. I remember we took and broke off, we kind of pulled together some, because this was a speech of liberation for us. And I remember people trying to still figure out, but how does this fit? How I personally came there with a Chinese woman, who are all friends of mine, a German woman, other Black folks. I mean, I had this multi cultural thing going on in terms of my friendship group. And it's like, okay, so now what do I do with you? What does it say? Is this saying I can't love? What is it saying? And so there was a lot of tension for people to kind of work it out. We pulled together and had a meeting together that evening. And a friend of ours who we love dearly, who was a worker, in InterVarsity worker. And I'll be honest with you, this woman, Barbara, now some of you will understand this and some of you won't. Barbara, I had been in her company for probably about 1.5 years and had no idea that she was not African American. I did not know that she was not Black, but that she she was light-skinned and Black. Her hair was of the type of more coarse type of hair. And she came into the meeting and she said, oh, maybe I shouldn't be here. And I went, well, why not? She was taking her own responsibility to say she was going to respect the fact that this was a meeting call for Black students. And she was not going to invade that or use her privilege to invade that. And I couldn't understand what was going on because I thought she was Black. But so there was tension all over the place. And it was good tension because it caused us to have to struggle and come up with understanding what exactly is it that Jesus is saying? And therefore, how do I have to respond?
I just looked up the speaker list.
Yeah.
This might help you, for some of you anyway. John Alexander, where do we go from here? At the top it says Urbana 70, and the title of the theme of the conference was Christ the Liberator.
That's right.
And so John Alexander spoke on where do we go from here. John Stott,
yes,
foot washing the Lord and Savior. John Stott, the second coming of Christ. John Stott, the threefold duty of the Christian. John Stott, the Master's Final Prayer. Leighton Ford, the brother-in-law of Billy Graham. The message of the Bible is a universal message. Who to tell, ? And Paul Little, God's will for me and world evangelism. Yeah. And then finally was Tom Skinner, racism and world evangelism.
Wow.
So that gives you the list of the
Thank you for
speakers.
doing that. Yeah. So
Thank you. So Marcy Peterson, if you'd like to unmute yourself and raise your question.
Well, I'm fascinated by the fact that what you're talking about and what Tom Skinner talked about are so contemporary. But it made me think about John Lewis and also Howard Thurman. And I wonder if you two could talk about anything that those two men have meant to you personally, or what you know about how they might have been influenced by Skinner.
My suspicion,
go ahead.
Okay, my suspicion is
to write a message.
My suspicion is that I have nothing to base this on, but that probably Howard Thurman might have had influence on Tom Skinner rather than the other way around. And I suspect that, well, I'm trying to think, when did John Lewis come into Congress? Can't remember what year he came in, because Skinner died in 94. Yeah, so I'm trying to, I just don't know. So I don't know that there would have been a lot of necessary interaction between the two of them.
89.
Yeah, he came in 89. So well after Tom Skinner's departure. But I would suspect that his wife, Barbara,
Absolutely.
did have contact interactions with, probably with Skinner, because she's still
With John.
fairly connected in the Washington scene.
With John Lewis.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, with John Lewis.
Yeah. Yeah. I believe that they would have had an amen corner going on.
Yeah.
Did you want to comment on how the Thurman had influence on either one of you? How those, or John Lewis had influence on you?
Well, let me say this. I think a couple things. You may have been surprised to hear when Tom was talking about truth and talking about why young people are moving to all of these other traditions, etc. He talked about Buddhism and this and that, and you know, I mean, I think that is exactly where Howard Thurman was, which is why I'm thinking it would have been the reverse, that Thurman would have influenced Tom. I did not know. I came to know of Howard Thurman later, but in part because of particular the mentor, one of my mentors, Vincent Harding, who was one of a mentee of Howard Thurman, who began to kind of mentor me as a student at Ida School of Theology when I was in Denver. And then our friendship over the years, and he would always reference our brother Howard would say such and such, and our brother Howard would say this, and our brother, and so it drove me to become familiar with who Howard Thurman was, and to learn and read. Obviously I use his Jesus and the Disinherited as kind of a premier text, as one of the early 20th century writings on Black theology. So yeah, I mean, certainly he has had that kind of, Howard Thurman has had that kind of influence on me. I had the pleasure of meeting John Lewis when Sherrod Brown brought him to Lorain County. It turns out that here's a connector. The person that got me to move from Missouri to Connecticut, the one who changed his name, Jabari Simama, he and John Lewis became dear friends when he moved to Atlanta. And so over this past year, Jabari is a blogger, and he's written a couple of blogs about the nature of the kind of John Lewis as a father, which has been very, very insightful, because she's like our goddaughter, his oldest daughter, and John Lewis's son were friends and went to school together. And the Lewis family and the Mama family spent that time together. So it's interesting. We're all on a few degrees of separation from anybody, right? So, but that's what I would say.
Thank you. I'm looking around for other hands. Jen was invited. Laurel Price Jones, did you have a hand up? I know you were knitting at one point, so I was watching you pick and throw. So I don't. Is Laurel still there?
I'm still here.
Yes, there you are. So
Yes.
did you have a hand up?
I do have a hand up.
Go ahead, Laurel.
Okay, well, I'm a little afraid to ask, but shoot, nothing ventured. As I listened to what he had to say this morning, and I thought back to my own, how I perceived the world in 1970. Which was, of course, from, my point of view, just graduated from Oberlin. I saw racism as a Southern problem. And, now I just see, I'm just appalled by the way people feel free to express racist feelings. it just seems like it's worse now. But I don't have the lived experience. I just have the, seen from afar experience. But I was also concerned, when he talked about the disparity between the haves and the have-nots, which is certainly in the last 50 years gotten even worse. It's worse now than it was 50 years ago. So when you have someone who's so right on the money, and so many people understanding what he's saying, what does it take to make a difference?
That's right.
And do you get discouraged when you think so much time has passed, so many words spoken, so many things done, and yet we're still in this? Well, anyway, that's my question.
Yeah.
Good question. I had the absolute privilege to be able to speak for St. Andrew's Episcopal and Christ Church on Sunday. And the word that I pulled out of Dr. King's I've been to the mountaintop was it was about being dark. Is it dark enough yet? And so, Laura, I agree with you. Is it dark enough yet? When will it be dark enough? How much actually has to yet happen? How close to somebody else's life does this have to get for them to kind of get it? I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. My mother left the South of Charlotte, North Carolina when she was 19, vowed to never return again. And I only know portions of, I can only imagine putting, as I'm old, much older, kind of understanding why she felt so adamant about not being in the South. She was kind of feisty. And the truth of the matter, she may not have lived very long in the South, much longer. But the reality is that she came north and it had its own racist thing, because racism is systemic. And so it's in systems. That's why universities could be built on the back of slaves, and those slaves, those very slaves' descendants aren't even allowed to have admission into it. I mean, that racism is, it's not just Southern. It's in a system, and it's folks who have to be able to call it out for what it is, and not see the separation for themselves in another. It's not the other. It's one of the things I said in the sermon was we have to be able to love the other and theirs as much as we love ours and ourselves and ours. In the same way, you cut me, I will bleed red. I promise you. You cut you, you will bleed red. We are human together, and all dignity and needs to be afforded to all human beings, not because of the color of one's skin. So I don't know if you have.
Yeah, no, I just reminded Malcolm X talked when somebody said something about the South, and he said anything south of the Canadian border is South.
South. Right, that's a good point.
So don't fool yourself thinking that because you're up north that you ain't South. And that racism isn't alive and well, and it is. It's in the water we drink, in the air that we breathe. It has.
It's on what side of the street people pick up garbage or don't pick up garbage. Or is it the people who live there? That's their problem because they just dirty and filthy.
Yeah.
You know, it's all
Yeah. So
it's insidious.
Yeah.
Doesn't it seem though like the last 4 years have given people somehow a sense that they had permission to speak out on things that they would, and act out in things they would never have done before.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, Trump has unchained. It's not that they were never there.
Mm-hmm.
They've always been there. They've always been in American culture. And,
from America's inception.
Yeah, it's always been there.
Mm-hmm.
But you can keep the lid on the pit of hell for so long, and then someone can unleash it. And I think that he's taken the chains off of the hounds from hell, and allowed them to stick their heads out of their hole. And yeah, so I think that is That is true, but don't assume that these 4 years is something that came out of nowhere. I think that's a bad assumption. They've always been there. We've always had to raise our children to be conscious of where they are, who they're with, what the conditions they're under, because we know it's always there. It's always there.
So I'm watching our time, but I have another question that's come up in the chat that is, so Marcy Peterson is asking, the mainline Protestant church doesn't often talk about principalities and powers, unless you're reading Walter Wink. Is it important for us to name evil, to really call it out? And I think I'm going to just add on to Marcy's question slightly. I think the challenge is, at least for me as a preacher, I know that I worry about that. I want to call out evil. On the other hand, I want to be careful not to demonize other human beings. And so, part of the question is, how do you name things without dehumanizing people? As we've been saying throughout this, these are children of God, but boy, we really have some major problems. So comments, thoughts?
Yeah. I'd like to hear some other folks' thoughts about that.
Yeah.
I mean, I appreciate your caution, David. But I think we have to, for me, I've said before, this is what the principalities and powers in higher places look like. January the 6th. Unclothed, that's what it looks like. I just think that there are evil forces out there. I'm Pentecostal, so I have no problem talking about spiritual issues, right? And principalities and power. I believe the devil exists, okay? And people, people have their own theologies about that, but I believe the devil exists, and I think he exists in real live people, has influence over real live people, and this was the best demonstration of that in my book.
I appreciate that question, and thank you for the response, AG. Next time we have coffee, I'd love to explore this more.
Yeah.
We'll just start there and see where it goes. Because I think that's one of the challenges of mainline Protestantism, that where we can be listening to other voices within Christianity and learn to claim some of that stronger language in ways that it can be impactful and meaningful and have theological integrity. So thank you.
Yeah, I just somebody I'll have to send it to you, David. I just saw somebody sent me a New York Times article recently about Joshua Jeremiah, who was a kind of Pentecostal type prophetic, person who's given prophecies, obviously conservative, etc. And even he, in the New York Times, this article was writing about how he too, after giving all these prophecies about how that Trump was like the king, was like King Cyrus, with all of his foibles, to do something for God's people, right? On and on and on. And he laid out all of these prophecies and what would happen, and and now he had to come back and eat his words. And did so very publicly. And I too am leery of over spiritualizing issues and ways in which we think about the world. But at the same time, I do believe that there are spiritual issues in this world that we have to grapple with. I think spiritual evil is live and well.
Thank you. I'm looking around one last time. Ruth Ann, did you have a hand up? Yes. So Ruth Ann Clark, go ahead.
John?
John Gates does too.
Okay, so I'll get to John next. So let's go with Ruth Ann, and then we'll go over to John Gates, and I'll take one. If you've got a question, leave your hand up as I take one more sweep around the room. So go ahead, Ruth Ann.
Well, David, your question, how do you call out evil without demonizing some other person or structure or something? And I appreciate the question. I think, I guess for me, we call out the evil, but then when the hand goes out needing a piece of bread or some kind of aid in some fashion, we don't deny them just because we've called them evil. So it's a really tough line to walk.
That's right.
That's right.
But we name the evil as we perceive it according to our understanding of how the gospel frames it.
That's right. We don't get an opportunity to pass by not still treating that person or that situation in a humane way. We don't get a pass.
Yeah, right. Even though we don't like them.
Right.
Really don't like what they're doing at all. They
So-
call it out.
John Gates, it looks like you get the last question today. Go for it.
Okay. First, Brenda and AG, I want to thank you so much for your presentation and for your sharing. That was wonderful. And I also want to say that I have developed the deepest respect for Ibram Kendi and his ability to identify sources of racism from so many elements in this country going back to the founding. It has been just a revelation of how deep racism is and how much we have to overcome.
Yeah.
And this is a good start, you know. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John.
And Linda.
We love y'all.
We love you too.
Back at you.
There's a beautiful place to end. And so thank you, AG and Brenda, so much for this conversation today. I look forward to future conversations. We will find some additional ways to continue forward in these conversations, but blessings upon you. And thank you for everyone that tuned in this afternoon.
Thank you.
Have a peaceful evening.
All right.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David, for
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
moderating too. Take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you all.